tea, Madi.
Well, thank you, Millie. Thank you, everyone, and welcome back. If you've just tuned in, you are on the first day of the Henry Stewart Dam Retail and CPG Session Industry Week. We're talking retail here, and that has never been more important than right now. Thanks to the pandemic, everything has become so important for consumer behavior, and it relies on digital asset management and metadata. I've got a fantastic group of mavens here, metadata mavens. I have a flock, I have a gaggle, or maybe my favorite right now is I have a murder of metadata mavens. And the subject that we're talking about today is essentials in metadata mapping. The expertise that I have on this panel, we're going to run out of time long before we run out of things to talk about. So I'd like to go ahead and get started. I'm going to have them each introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about who they are and what they're doing, what organization that they work for. But I also would like to ask them to answer one question, and that is, how did you get here? Not everyone, I didn't raise my hand and say, I think I would like to grow up to be a digital asset manager. That's not what I did. So everyone has a very interesting path to DAM. So if I could begin, I'm going to start with you, Elana. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Elana Mitchel. I'm the digital asset manager for Pat McGrath Cosmetics. I've been there, it's coming up on 3 years, and we just implemented our first DAM last summer. I'm currently rolling it out to different teams, depending on their use case scenarios. And so I used to be a graphic designer, and I did production design, graphic design. My strength was always more technical. So on the production side, just being a designer and having to archive assets old school on file servers, and being the person that was getting the requests from everybody for different things, that's how I fell into DAM, and I love it very much.
Great, thank you. Molly?
Hi, Molly Barrett-O'Callahan. You might have seen just a previous panel with me on it. I am with Big Lots. I'm currently working with them on an implementation of a brand new, shiny, top-of-the-line dam. We are currently past the discovery process and into technical implementation. It's very fun. And my background is film and media, so I was originally slated to go more into TV and film editing, and then I slid sideways.
Great, thank you, Molly. Heather?
Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Polen. I work for Sitecore, where I lead their customer transformation team. And previous to Sitecore, I actually spent 22 years in the CPG industry. I started out in sales and marketing, and then I found myself 13 years later over on the IT side of the space. And so DAM for me was kind of the convergence of sales and marketing and IT.
Thank you. And Carey?
Hi, everyone. I'm Carey MacDonald. I'm a principal onboarding manager at Bynder. I've been with Bynder for about 7 years now, partnering with customers to implement their DAMs, audit them, and make sure they're getting the best out of the system. And I found my way into DAM through my background in anthropology, which led me into library and information science, through museums, libraries, and archives, or libraries, archives, and museums, LAMs, as they say. And I absolutely love DAM and being in the tech space, working with customers across all industries. So really excited to speak today.
Great. I'm so glad that you're here. Since this topic is about metadata mapping, it assumes that you're migrating something from one place to another, because you usually wouldn't need to map it unless you want to integrate it. But can you give us each a chance to, what is your experience in metadata mapping in the digital asset management system that you're working on right now? And Elana, can I start with you again?
Absolutely. So we are thinking about eventually getting a PIM, but we do not have one yet. So one of the main things that we've been trying to capture in the DAM is the SKU and UPC information of our e-commerce assets, because we get requests from our retail partners by SKU. So one thing that I've done is we've created a guide that we give to our photographers when they're shooting our e-commerce products. And that guide is file naming, and there's a couple pieces of information that we ask them to fill out or embed in the IPTC metadata fields of their assets. So that way the SKU and UPC information, when it's uploaded, it tags or it automatically maps to those two sections in our DAM. And also with our file naming, I worked with our vendor to create short codes, and we have kind of a list, like a lookup table that happens on the back end. So depending on the product, everything has a product ID, which I created for all our products initially before we set up the DAM. And that's just so it automatically will tag like the kind of product it is. So for example, if we're using, if it's a matte trance lipstick, if you're familiar with Pat McGrath, that's one of her top lipsticks. So we name everything MT, and that automatically will tag it as a lipstick. So I'm working on that with all our different products. And that's just so we can not ask our uploaders to tag so many different things. And, you know, we're trying to take as much off of their plate as possible.
Wow, that's great. Thank you very much. Before I get to Molly, I want to remind you that on the right-hand side, use a little chat sessions that you can join and give us your thoughts, be as interactive as you want to. And then right next to that is a Q&A tab. And so please, if you have any questions that you would like to ask any of the panelists, put it up there. And then when we get to the Q&A, I'll be able to read it and we can get a conversation going. So thank you. Molly, metadata mapping, what's it to you?
So we have an existing PIM, very much similar to what Elana was talking about in the way that the legacy DAM that we had was already connected to the PIM, but our ability to revise what it was collecting and really optimize it was very limited. So as we're going into this new DAM, a lot of the focus has been on, okay, what was, you know, we have a few items that were connected then, but what is available now, and what would actually be searchable, what would be functional for the different departments that are using it. So things, category, division, SKU, you know, we have a whole list that we laid out of controlled metadata structure of, you know, how much of this is going to be drawn from the PIM. Some of it is going to actually be drawn from the content management system. A lot of times we're used to the DAM feeding the content management system. In this case, because we work with outside manufacturers and vendors, they are able to drop their information into the content management system when we're able to draw it the other way. And so we can draw from our own resources, from their resources to feed that information. We also work with Creative for the shot lists also feed our DAM. So based on the naming structure we've given it, it's able to pull in information about where, when, how it was shot, et cetera, if it's relevant to searchability. So that's been something we've been focusing on now, is not just having the most bare bones metadata, but making it so that the folder structure and naming structure can be almost obsolete. That the whole focus, 90% of the focus, is around findability through metadata without overloading it or making it non-maintainable.
That's the art, isn't it? That is the art of a metadata model. And
I'm
so
not claiming we've perfected it.
That's right. Okay. And then for Heather and Carey, because you don't represent one particular business, I just had this question. How often do you get people to say, okay, we just want to recreate this folder structure in your DAM? And how do you handle that? Heather?
So I think that's fairly common, and it looks like Carey's nodding and so maybe we're both here on the same page, but I think that's fairly common. And the way I generally handle it is by talking about the end user experience, right? Because when you listen to what Molly is talking about, to what Elana is talking about, they're really talking about making sure that the end user has a really good experience. And so transferring what you have today and mapping it exactly the same way may not be that experience that you want your users to have. So really understanding what that is, how easy or complicated it needs to be, that needs to be the discussion. And then is that appropriate, or is there a different path we should take? I don't know, Carey, if you have other
Yeah.
thoughts.
Absolutely would agree there. I think seeing everything that currently exists, that full folder structure, and taking that in really to analyze and evaluate and decide what is most important from it to put into the DAM, what is going to be, you know, the key identifier or identifiers to connect to other systems if there is a PIM, CMS, other systems in place. But trying not to, as Molly started to get into as well, over catalog in the DAM, because we really want to think about, as you were saying there, Heather, too, the end user experience. So what are the top key fields, potentially subfields as well, that further support those fields that we absolutely need for filtering and searching in the DAM? And then what are the key identifiers? Maybe there are just a few number fields or a few name fields that relate back to other systems where maybe additional information is cataloged in those systems for those uses. So that is definitely a big part of our discovery process with customers, and making sure that we're not overburdening the system, but we're also not missing out on anything when we're doing the initial analysis.
Right, very good. Getting people off of folder structures is always a challenge because it's like a security blanket, isn't it? They feel safe, they know where it is, but no one else does. I mean, no one else knows where that is except for them that put that folder structure together. So I always find that an interesting challenge. And also folder structure naming is metadata, and you can use that, right? So excellent work. Now, we've already brought up PIM and CRM, but I'm going to go back to PIM, which is product information management. And in retail and CPG, that's really important. The names of the products that are in the photo, or the names of the products that are, on the social media video, for instance. My question to each one of you is, does a PIM belong in the DAM? What do you think? Molly, what do you think?
No. And I actually have run a DAM that reflected a good deal of the information of PIM and essentially operated as a more accessible PIM to the vendors that were using product. I was working with a manufacturing company, and that works for them to a certain extent, is to import a good deal of that PIM information, because their DAM is a bit of a more of an open book for salespersons and other people that need to reference it. They're able to reference assets and then reference key information about it. And theoretically, some of these vendors are able, DAM vendors are able to allow the embed of an asset and then the embed of the associated metadata. So theoretically, they could embed a product image and then automate pulling in that information from one place. So, I can see how that could be appealing. But it can create a nightmare for searchability. If you're getting into your mind that you're going to fully flesh a whole product page from metadata in the DAM, that's not its purpose. And if I was to do it again, I would push harder against that type of method. I think you're losing out on the functionality, the structural strength of having those pillars of content management, of having your product information management and dedicated DAM, and then allowing them to do what they do best.
I just want to agree with Molly, because that's something that we keep running into. We just keep putting out products, and a lot of, the names are similar, or, just findability is that whole thing. But I went against putting more product information into our DAM, because I'm really trying to set us up to get the PIM. And like I said, I really picked out like the two key pieces of information that is running from our, we use NetSuite for our ERP. So, and again, that's the SKU and the UPC, but there's so much other information that I think the PIM is better to handle that. So I was very careful on which information I wanted to pull eventually from the PIM.
Yeah.
Excellent. And from, I mean, so for Heather and Carey, do you think that a PIM, that DAM will eventually evolve or expand enough to be able to include the PIM, or do you think that that's pushing the technology to do something it's never meant to do?
I would say there might be an evolution to include a bit more PIM in DAM, but I don't think that it really is feasible or that valuable to push the DAM all the way to that extent, right? I think that the DAM is meant for all kinds of users, whereas the PIM has a little bit more of a specific focus, a specific, channel or set of channels that it's pushing out to, and, product data management or information management, is a discipline unto itself. Whereas, a marketer might not need to have all of the same really detailed, heavily cataloged information for a particular product asset or branded asset that's stored in the DAM. They really just need the top information. They might be more curious about usage information. They might be more curious about, years and dates applied to the asset more than, or, different types of information than what having a full PIM catalog in the DAM would do. So I do think keeping the two separate is still the best, but I do see that potentially there could be a push for some more PIM-like functionality perhaps, or more robust integrations for the DAM to connect with PIM, but I do think they need to remain separate. Heather, I'm not sure if you'd agree there.
Yep. Carey, I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
And I would say, I think of the DAM and the PIM as close cousins, right?
Yeah.
They need to work together, and they
Yep.
need to work together very well. I would be very, very cautious at trying to integrate anything that claims to do everything. I think that
I would second that. I
Yeah.
think when you're adding those layers of complexity, you're adding layers of dependencies, and any improvement to functionality, any roadmap is always going to have to take into consideration all this
Yep.
breadth of functionality you have now added to this tool, and maintaining all of that, which can take away from the forward momentum that DAM has in improvement.
Mm-hmm.
I agree, Molly. And I think when you think of DAM, right, we're thinking about marketing content very specifically and how you can really start to leverage that across your organization versus if you were to try to integrate both and try to be all things to everyone, I think that becomes very hard to do. So I would caution folks at looking at full solutions. I think those are very difficult. I think there is a place for a PIM and a DAM. To Molly's point, I think you'll have a much better experience. And I talked about end user experience is probably going to be my mantra this session. But I think from an end user experience, you're going to have a much better end user experience if those close cousins talk to one another, but don't try to be each other.
Mm-hmm. And I think adding to that, Heather, something you said there reminded me or made me think, it also helps with rollout and adoption if you're splitting up systems, right? Like I think what Elana is doing right now, right? Getting the DAM in a place where people are using it, at a high level and really, consolidating everything, centralizing the brand, making sure we're all speaking the same language and putting out the same content to the world. Then once that's gotten going, you can, incorporate a PIM, or some folks again start with PIM and then add on DAM. So I think if we try to do both at once, then you're in implementation forever. It's never out. You're not getting the return on investment, and folks can't, because folks can't use it. So separating the systems also, has that benefit as well.
I think if you're getting the feedback from, as a DAM manager, from someone on high that the DAM doesn't do enough, they don't understand what the DAM does,
right,
or the DAM is not being implemented to its fullest, because a DAM should be doing plenty. It should be a beast of its own design. So adding another layer of complexity and effort and functionality to that, it could be nightmarish. There should be the dedicated PIM manager, the dedicated DAM manager working together.
Molly, I think that's really an interesting comment too about then they probably don't know all of the functionality your DAM has. Because I think so often when it comes to systems and especially DAMs, there is a lot of functionality, but and a lot of it is not leveraged, right?
Absolutely,
And
I agree.
so it's how do you implement it, get the organization understanding and transitioned into it, and then really fully leverage what you have. And so I don't know if you have thoughts from a user standpoint, but I think that's an interesting point.
No, I absolutely agree. And it's from the perspective of an enormous amount of feedback that I get early on in these type of projects stems from just the fundamental misunderstanding of what DAM is, what CMS is, what any of these are. And so often it becomes overwhelming or feels wasteful to take the time to elaborate on that. But for people, especially in the higher level sponsors and who they're communicating with, if they don't understand, it will come back to bite you, because you're going to get requests like that or mismanaged expectations.
I know I, from the beginning, have been trying to educate my stakeholders. And from day one, I started talking about a PIM. And, you know, we have a project management tool that they've been using years before we had a DAM. And I know there's so much information trapped in that project management tool. So that's also, you know, me thinking about what information is in there that we can also integrate or map or pull out. And a question I get all the time is, oh, is the DAM going to replace this project management tool? And no, it's not. They work together. They work together. And that's something I'm constantly letting the people that I work with know. You know, this is going to capture all our assets and that information. And this is going to capture all the product information. And this is going to capture the workflow tasks. So I'm constantly trying to remind them of that, even though our technology isn't quite there yet. I'm like, it's on the horizon. It's going to be fantastic, but they have to have faith that'll happen.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I was just going to say that our project management solution is also a source for metadata, looking at what information is already existing and is QA'd, and then being able to lean into that as a resource.
Excellent. Well, I mean, what you're touching up on also is that everything's metadata. Metadata is everywhere. It's everywhere. So when people want to say, well, metadata is for DAM, you can, well, it's not just for DAM. As you said, Elana, there's metadata, there's PIM, there's metadata for the CRM, there's metadata from the project management, there's metadata from the marketers. There's lots of different data sets now that can be integrated and leveraged and mapped to a certain extent. So let me ask you this question. I mean, do you think that DAM will eventually be integrating with multiple data sets, and which ones are the most important to you that you see in the future? What is coming down the line, Elana?
Honestly, what's coming down the line is part of my fantasy world right now. We're really just still working through processes with our DAM because it is still fairly new. But, you know, I have had those conversations with the product owners of, you know, our ERP system, or, you know, kind of looking at, oh, should we continue with this workflow tool, or should we look at another one? So when I say it's down the line, I say it's in my head. It's part of my roadmap that I've created. And I know, like, I can see it in my head how everything can kind of work together. But once we get the DAM in a better place where I can kind of move a little bit off of that and have somebody else maybe manage that a little bit more, then we can start looking at leveraging our other systems, especially to handle our retail requests and distribution. Like that's what I'm hoping we're looking at in the next couple of years, is to solidify that process and just getting assets out quickly to our retail partners.
Excellent. Anyone want to add to that? Well, because I know that both Bynder and Sitecore are API integration ready, that's part of what they do, because it's not, they are now assuming that they will be integrating, that the DAM is not going to be another silo system in a garden of siloed systems, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Using the API to either custom build, custom develop integrations to your exacting specifications, you know, for PIM, for CRM, for CMS, for social, all kinds of different you know, mediums or channels that you can push to. But then also we're constantly having to consider and develop, you know, plugins for easy, you know, mapping of asset and or metadata from Bynder to other system or vice versa, making sure that there is a clean, easy way to keep things in sync, so that not only are we managing the brand, the assets at the DAM level, but of course what's going out into the world, what's syndicated throughout, of course, to retailers is the exact same best-in-class information and you know, assets. So that's definitely a top priority. And is definitely a big push to make sure DAM is at the center of the digital ecosystem that your business, you know, is working within, and making sure that we can manage and integrate with multiple data sets, to your point there, Madi, that, you know, there are going to be, it might just not be product information, but other sorts of, you know, social ready or other retail ready information that we have to prepare the DAM to manage, essentially.
Heather, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I would just say, I think Carey hit on this a bit, but I think as you look at all of the channels that you're touching today, as you look at the proliferation of e-commerce, as you look at how you have to start to engage with your consumer,
Yeah.
that readiness to be able to integrate with other touch points is really important. And so today it might be social or it may be PIM, but tomorrow it might be some type of new commerce or something that we don't even know about yet. And so as you think about that integration ready, I think it's really important, because as much as I think we're going quickly, I think our consumers are going faster. And so they're ready to engage with brands and to really have absorb and consume a lot of content. And so we have to be ready to serve that content to them and integrate wherever it makes the most sense.
Right.
I'd
Nice.
like to just add on to that integration questions was definitely part of, you know, choosing our vendor. We did a bunch of different demos, and when I started at the company, like I said, I kind of looked at all the other things that we're using and what's worth maybe integrating. So our choice of vendor was definitely like, look, this is the foundation that we're going to do now, but I know we're going to grow and we're going to evolve, and I need you to evolve with us. So that was definitely, I had a list of like, can you integrate with this? Can you integrate with that? Even if it might not happen for, you know, a couple of years, at least knowing that that option is there for us to grow and not have to like pivot real quickly and figure out a different, you know, solution. So
integrations were definitely weighing heavy on our decision making as well.
Yeah. And Elana, I think that those integration and those discussions around integrations become really important, especially as you look beyond DAM. Right? Because as you look beyond DAM and you look at the entire MarTech stack, there are so many different options for technology.
Yeah.
And I mean, literally thousands, right? And so you're not in a world any longer of one monolithic, huge platform that does everything for you. Like we talked about a little bit before with PIM and DAM, but thinking even more broadly across your stack, there are far more components in that stack. And so having something that's API ready, headless, able to integrate and be a friend to other technology is really important, especially because, again, as consumer needs change, as your business changes, you've got to be able to get in and out of technology very quickly. So whatever you choose from a DAM perspective really needs to be able to integrate with whatever you have in your stack.
Well said. I do believe you have to look forward somewhat, not just in discovery of what currently exists, but in discovery of what could exist.
Well, this let me ask you this question now. Now we're talking about metadata mapping. We've been talking about mapping to other information or other data sets so that you can leverage them. As you can automate some tagging, you can reference, you can start building on it. But another important part of metadata mapping is through migration. And so my question to you is, have you seen a metadata model that worked yesterday, but will no longer work today? That there's certain kinds of metadata that you actually wouldn't migrate into the new system, and how do you identify them?
I'm
We
not
certainly
sure-
have
oh,
metadata points that we are not carrying over. I wouldn't say they wouldn't work for everyone, but there was certainly an identification of 50% of the metadata was simply pulled in because it existed, and not necessarily because it was necessity. But Elana, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm not even sure if this answers your question entirely, but you know, we've developed a couple different metadata schemas too. So it's not, there isn't a one size fits all. So we do have a metadata schema that handles our e-commerce product. And then we do have a metadata schema that handles all our fashion runway stuff, which is just a completely different, all the metadata information from that, you know. So it's developing the schemas and figuring out what's the most important, with, you know, that people are using. So right now we have two that do different mappings in our system.
Yeah, I definitely see that as well, having, you know, multiple schemas within one larger schema, you know, based on user, and you have certain triggers, you know, to create certain you know, cascades of fields, you know, based again on maybe department, unit, some sort of entity. And something that comes to mind for me as well, looking back a few years, I know at one point having stock imagery in the DAM was, and is, you know, important. And we had been building in, you know, quite a few fields and identifiers for stock imagery from different stock houses before we had integrations ready. Now we have integrations, we have plugins to those different, you know, stock houses. So we have to think a little bit differently about how we categorize those assets when they come in from the stock houses, the stock sites to Bynder. So I think that's an example of just over the past few years of how, at least, you know, for us at Bynder, that has evolved, where the metadata model has kind of shifted towards only, you know, these key fields are really necessary, because we're actually capturing a lot more from the automated pull into Bynder through that plugin. So it's something I actually hadn't thought of that much, but I think that that is a big one related to stock imagery that's changed recently and made metadata models, you know, change as well.
Right. Yeah. Heather, anything to add there?
No, I think they said it pretty well.
Yeah. Of course. Yes, metadata models are perspectives, right, into the whatever assets that you need, and the perspective of the users, and that is never static. Everyone has their own perspective. And in the last session, Molly was advising to go out when you want to sell that DAM, is to sell it to the user. What's in it for them? Right? Not what's so cool about the system, but how is it going to help them? And that's a perspective. But I've got lots of questions here about metadata. One question is there such a thing as a core metadata model that can be used across all of the different perspectives? Is that possible?
We have a core metadata model that is being used to that extent. So we chose not to whittle down to each perspective, because we know our user base fairly well, and we were able to whittle down the metadata to not overweigh it, so that other users are not having to tangle with. So I think keeping it clean, keeping it tight, keeping it communicative with the users, you can on your own come down to a core model in which everything has accessibility to everyone, and you don't need to hide visibility of certain metadata. I do think that any core model that is whittling down to the point where there's no specialization to it whatsoever is going to be lacking, but perhaps others could speak to that.
Anyone?
I know we
Okay,
we
thanks,
do We do recommend, at least from a best practice perspective, to get started, a few core fields, things like asset type and usage rights to get the wheels turning. And then it usually does turn into, based on conversations and discovery, that each customer does decide on a core set of fields. It might just be 3 to 5 that become, mandatory required fields for every single asset that goes into the system. So you've got that baseline level of cataloging for every asset, everyone's accounted for. And then to Molly's point there, trying to keep that succinct, concise, really, really key information that crosses all of the assets in the system. And then when needed, you can create those extra perspectives per user type to create additional schemas. So I think that's something we definitely lead with, is having at least a core set of fields.
Anyone else would like to add to that?
No, I would agree with have a core set of fields. I tend to see that the hardest part is when you get outside of that core set of fields. So when you start to say, oh, these are the 3 to 5 that we're going to absolutely require, if you can agree to those, amazing. Then it's really being careful not to put too much on top, so that you can have that succinct look. So I tend to believe that core data is a bit easier to come to agreement on. It's once you start to get outside of that things can get a little bit more difficult.
I think oftentimes sustainability of the data gets overlooked in terms of either you think that you know who or what can supply it, but realistically, does that individual or process have the bandwidth to do that? Just because they are a reliable resource does not mean that they are available to do that.
Right.
Yeah, they have other day jobs often. Yeah, they have day jobs, right? And so it's, can they really be there? I completely agree with that, Molly.
Well, let me ask you this then. Is there such thing as too much metadata?
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
I was being told a horror story the other day by someone who was not in DAM, who had encountered a DAM manager. And it's one of those things that is like the Twilight Zone or like some kind of horror movie, I don't know, in which this individual apparently took it upon themselves to document every conceivable detail of every image that was not necessary for the searchability or the, is the model wearing a watch? We're not a watch company. Things like that. So I do think people, obviously that's an extreme, but that was an individual that was, I want tens upon tens upon tens of metadata fields, because rather than do discovery to determine what's important, I would rather just capture it all. But I do think it's easy to accidentally go a little bit overboard, not quite to that extent, but I do believe that in an attempt to accommodate requests from outside parties that are not the people that are going to have to maintenance it, or the people that actually are, these people are simply ideating on what could be, maybe, but they aren't the ones doing the discovery to determine what's actually being used. And they're speaking to a momentary convenience and not a long-term sustainable data. So yes, I absolutely believe that you can get into a situation in which you're going, the searchability today did not, well, I should say, people have a tendency to think DAM is Google. And they want the metadata to overreach its knowledge of their interest in an asset or whatever it is they're searching. And so it's easy to try to play catch up to that and try to satisfy all these stakeholders and then not be realistic about the metadata. And then you end up stacking and stacking and stacking.
Anyone care to add to that?
And then at the end of the day, you end up having to redo it all because you couldn't maintain what you did. So then you go back to ground zero.
Yeah, and when you can't maintain it, you've made that metadata point, that attribute, completely unusable because it's completely unreliable.
Yes.
It's only in half of the assets.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's very important. I think that there's a psychological impulse that people think that more metadata, that you must capture everything. And it's an impulse. They don't really think about all the important things like the resources and maintaining it and what it does for the search and the retrieval.
Right.
So resist the impulse, I would say. When you resist the impulse to capture everything you possibly could think of about an asset and focus on the most salient or important information. Yes?
Yeah, I think it's like the measure twice, cut once type of a deal. Is really do your discovery. Don't just leap onto every metadata point in site.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
And I think it's also key to keep in mind, you know, Molly, you mentioned like accidentally over tagging or over applying metadata. And if you do get into a position where that's happened or happening, I think it's just having the open-mindedness, the awareness that that might be happening, and let's maybe pause and zoom out and, you know, refine this in, you know, a week's or a month's time. So I think knowing just like metadata models are evolving and changing, those schemas are going to change, you know, the amount that you're putting in will change, and it's okay to take time to, you know, kind of pull it back or refine it. I've seen some folks, you know, just kind of barrel ahead thinking, well, we've got it, you know, we don't want to take it out because what if one person, you know, in this remote corner is actually using this, we don't want to upset them, right? But I think being a little bit more deliberate, you know, making decisions to cut certain things out if you do find, you know, retrieval slow or people are overwhelmed by the amount of information that's there, the benefit's going to outweigh that small risk of, you know, impacting potentially one person. And maybe you can work with them or a department to sort of re-educate them on why, you know, this decision was made. So I think being steadfast in your decisions is key.
Yeah, I don't think speaking to the user and not gearing your metadata towards a single individual are contradictory. When we're talking about gearing it towards an individual, we're talking about the sell of what the overall DAM can do for the individual's sense of value to the company.
Yeah.
We're not talking about their ability to have their mind read by the DAM.
Exactly. Exactly. Love it.
We would be remiss to have a panel session on metadata without bringing up vocabularies, taxonomies, and shared descriptors within that metadata. How much do you think that the taxonomy or controlled vocabularies can actually mitigate different perspectives of a metadata model? I'm not sure if I'm even asking that right, but I always see the metadata model as they ask the questions and the vocabularies are the answer to that question. What is it? What is this asset? What is the asset type? Who does it belong to? Those sort of things. Do all of you, do you use controlled vocabularies or are you developing taxonomies?
Yes, we do a controlled vocabulary and cardinality. So essentially communicating exactly how many answers to a question there can be. So planning ahead that this can have 0 or 1 answer, it could have 0 or many answers, it could have 1 or many, it could have just 1, and it will always have that 1 because it's a required asset attribute. So yeah, no, we've definitely plotted out the metadata attributes, what kind of interaction we'd like them to have in terms of filling that out, if any, and trying to minimize as a priority any free writing, creative writing that might go into that sort of process, and focusing on exactly how many answers to a question there could be.
Great. So Elana, are you also developing controlled vocabularies as you move forward?
Absolutely, especially because we're dealing with product names and shades, and it's impossible to spell some of our shades. And that's something I ran into when I first started, was just basic file naming, because, you know, it could be a lipstick or whatever, but it has a shade that's 20 characters long. So really, like, I did have to step back originally and just figure out, okay, how are we going to plot this information and tag this information, and, you know, what's required upon upload versus what can we go back and upload after the fact. So there are some core things like you said, like asset type and, you know, approval status, stuff like that, that's basic required, and, you know, product focus if we're doing a campaign, like what is, you know, that specific product. But yeah, we don't want anybody spelling any of those shades anymore ever again. So that's been really great, actually, just being able to go through and just tag like, oh, she's wearing this and this and this and this, and then move on. So that helps a lot.
Yeah, no typing required, thank goodness.
Right.
So, and for the vendors, both of you offer taxonomy or controlled vocabulary management modules, I would assume, yes?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yes.
And during our implementation phase, we build that out with the customer, right? But then enable the customer to be able to manage that, update it long term. So yeah, controlled vocabulary is definitely key. And anywhere where there is sort of an input field, I usually recommend, you know, we try to have an awareness of, you know, governance and who will be owning those fields long term, right? Whether you're manipulating them in the back end manually yourself, or if there's an integration, you know, checking metadata and updating it based on what's in another system. So fields where there are inputs like that, those are ones that we sort of highlight yellow to make sure that there's a plan for managing. Yeah.
Okay, so there's the vocabulary librarian or the taxonomist, there's digital asset management system manager. Again, this is a collaborative endeavor all around, even within the little DAM world that we're managing here. This is a question that we always get, and someone said, did each of you state what system that you're using? And again, I just want to remind everyone that Henry Stewart is absolutely technology agnostic. They don't promote any one over the other. If you really want to find out, talk to them individually, talk to our panelists individually. Of course, the vendors will tell you exactly what you should be using, but the delegates will tell you what they're using if they feel comfortable. So there we go. Another question that came up earlier was, and this is obviously someone who's just starting on their DAM journey, which is, how do you find the metadata? How do you gather metadata on the mass scale? Where do you even start?
For us, it was taking account of what reliable data already existed. So then being able to work backwards. Obviously, we had some expectations going in of an idealistic metadata structure, but then being able to, during discovery, go team to team and say, what kind of sheets do you work with? What kind of resources do you work with? Where are you getting your information creatively, technically, however else? And so we were able to determine that Creative works with some documentation that is a QA'd, well-reviewed resource for a lot of the assets before they're even created. And so that was one that we would have not intuitively have gone for, but was a reliable resource. So a lot of times that information exists and is out there, and it may not necessarily be in your PIM.
Anyone would like to add to that?
We're still figuring out process. Honestly, our company is still fairly new. Honestly, it's not quite a startup anymore. I mean, it's about 5 years old. So everything about like our departments and processes, it's all sort of being created now. So I'm, like I said, working individually with each teams and figuring out the use case scenarios for each team is just how I went about figuring out. And that's what I kind of made it up. I don't want to say made it up, but I kind of made it up a little bit. You know, I'm like, this is what I think. And now that we're rolling it out, I can go back and tweak and be like, oh, we don't really need that because I didn't know. And, you know, it's just every team is different and the purpose is different. So I kind of came up with like, okay, this is what I think we need now. And I'm just tweaking it as we go.
Yeah, it's about the users, right?
Yep, absolutely.
It is about the users, and a couple of points, Elana, I think that you touched on. One, sometimes the people and process component of this are just as hard as trying to do anything else, because dependent on what your process is or is maybe not even there yet, trying to understand what that is, what is reliable, how often is it updated, where can I go, what do we even have, and figuring that out, and then how it will ultimately flow into your overall process can be just as challenging. The other thing I think you said that was really that's really spot on is around iterations. So I think we can all strive for perfection, but we're probably going to all be striving for years and years and years. And so it's about
well said.
getting it right enough that you have a foundation that you can then go back and say, this is working or this is not working. I want to add this. You know what? This isn't being used. Get rid of it right away then, right?
Yep.
Get it out of there. So really, again, going back to that process component and focusing in on what does that process look like and how can you iterate to great versus trying to get it perfect out of the gates, I think is really important.
Very important. Thank you. And I think that's the perfect note to end this panel discussion. I've got to run to the next one, and I hope that you all run with me. Come and join me for the final discussion with Clinique. And we'll be taking a look at best practices in Clinique and another cosmetics company. But let me just say thank you to my mavens. It was a pleasure to be in your company today. And thank you for sharing your expertise, your experience, and your knowledge. Thank you, all the people who joined us, and stick with us. Don't go away, and come to the next session. Again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.